Acción, tu revista mensual de cine y series, con los mejores estrenos de cine, fichas y reportajes coleccionables, series de televisión y 4 pósters todos los meses. Búscala en tu kiosco.
I work for a Spanish magazine, TV and movie magazine, film magazine. So we are focusing the interview in your career.
Do you want me to look in the camera or look at you?
Look at me.
Okay.
So, first of all, I want to ask you, remember in your career, how did you feel this world has changed, the world, not only writing for comic books, but also writing for TV, writing for films? How do you think this whole thing has changed in the last 20, 30, 40 years?
Well, if we're going to talk about genre storytelling, it didn't really exist. There were some attempts, and there was some very successful storytelling in that. I mean, I think Dick Donner's version of Superman and Christopher Reeve, and I think Tim Burton and Michael Keaton's Batman are absolutely benchmarks in terms of enabling people who came after that to tell the stories that they wanted to tell. For me, I take all of that, and the world changed when Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire made Spiderman in 2004. Because two things happened. One, it was, I think for a lot of people, the first time that they had seen a superhero story. I still refer to it as genre fiction. Because we had Star Wars, we had Star Trek, we had a lot of other ways that were opening doors. None of these things happened by themselves. When people realized that everyone on the planet went to see Star Wars, all of a sudden everyone went, oh, this little thing is not a little thing. It's not just for the freaks and geeks who go to comic book conventions, like the real world likes this stuff too. So when Spider-Man came out and was this now giant movie as well, that people suddenly went, oh, that to me was sort of the beginning of the MCU. And that enabled Marvel to really take the lead in terms of making movies that worked. Chris Nolan's work on the Batman trilogy is exceptional, and some of my favorite stuff, particularly Dark Knight. So there's not a single sort of moment that you can sort of point at, but it certainly is a time where I think anything is possible. Because what the business side understands, and that's what it's about at the end of the day, is that you can tell stories that a large audience will go see, or watch on television, or buy in comics. And when that happens, you get a lot more of it.
You mentioned Spider-Man, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, but you were involved in a project, a very successful project, a TV project, that set also the tone for what was going to happen in the last 25 years, Smallville. Smallville was a game changer also because 10 years before Smallville we had The Flash and it didn't work. But the Smallville really worked. Not only really worked so that we can do a TV show with Superman, but it can be serious sometimes, funny sometimes. It was the beginning of the Arrowverse, for instance, and many other TV shows that came later. So it was a really important game changer in that time.
It absolutely was. I mean, I don't think that without Buffy, there could have been a Smallville. And I was lucky to be involved in that show as well. But I had a great time on Smallville. I always consider it to be sort of my first show, even though I had been on Buffy. Because it was still a young show, and there were decisions that needed to be made in terms of the storytelling it was going to be. But I have to really give 100% of the credit to Al Goff and Miles Miller, who had a vision as to what it could be. Now, a lot of that vision, they've been very generous and said, this is what we read in For All Seasons. And so, and actually, if you know Al and Miles, they have a very sarcastic sense of humor, and they called and they said, listen, since we ripped you off from Superman For All Seasons, do you want to come in and see our pilot? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. And I couldn't believe how smart and funny and how terrific the actors were, and how a way of telling the Superman story that had never been told was being told. There was no costume. It was back to the 1950s and 60s where Clark and Lex lived in the same town and were friends. And there was Jonathan and Martha. And it was really a story about a family more than anything else. And then there was, 2 or 3 moments of superpowers, but that was always the secret. The secret was never make a show about powers. Make a show about characters, and then sprinkle in the powers. That's the salt. You need the steak in order to make it work. And we were all very lucky that we had an exceptional cast, many of whom are still my friends. And the writing staff was equally extraordinary. A lot of whom were young writers who had never worked on television shows before, myself included. But when you have people like Michael Green, and you have people like Mark Verhoeven, and these were seasoned guys who really knew how to tell stories. But mostly you had Alan Miles, who had a vision and stuck to the vision. Didn't worry about what anybody was saying, just said, this is what we're doing. And they used to say to us all the time, embrace the cheese, not the corn. The idea was that it was okay to be a little bit, if you know this word, schmaltzy, a little bit old-fashioned, but not corny, not for laughs. Don't do it because the people are going to laugh at what they're doing because they're behaving stupidly. Make sure that they're behaving the way that you want them to behave in a real world. And I think that did set a tone. It certainly set a tone for me when I was running Marvel Television, that it's one of the things that we would talk about all the time. I would just say, look, one of the things I learned on Smallville was I need to be able to tell the story without superpowers. And then we'll put the superpowers in. I don't need a great fight scene. We'll figure out the fight scene. That's easy. How do we get so that we care about Matt Murdock, that we care about Karen Page, that we care about, of all things, that we care about the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk? Now, we also were exceptionally lucky to get Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio, who remain really good friends of mine, came in and we cast them. Like when you have that kind of lightning, you let it strike you.
I want to ask you about that experience in Marvel Television and bringing so many different shows, brilliant shows. I was even in the set of Iron Fist and Luke Cage with Netflix a long time ago. But how was that? Because it set the tone for what was going to happen, not only on television, but also in film, in cinemas.
I got asked to run a television division. There was no television division. So you want me to invent a television division? And my boss, Dan Buckley, said, yeah. I said, I don't know how to do that. I know how to write and produce. He said, well, do that. And if by Christmas, this was like August, he said, by Christmas, you suck at it, we'll fire you. And I was like, okay, I'll try this. And I did the thing that I've always done, which is I hired the smartest people that I knew. And my head of production, my head of development, and then eventually we become 125 people that to this day are some of the smartest people that work in television. And I was lucky enough to get them on our team, and we all loved what we did. And we were very lucky that Netflix had 2 other television shows, Orange is the New Black and House of Cards. They didn't like us. And Marvel was Marvel. They had just made the Avengers. It was like the biggest movie of all time. So Netflix was looking for something to put them on the map. We were looking for something to put us on the map. So it was a really good marriage that happened while we were still making Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC, which was more like the movies.
Completely different.
And I say this all the time. The movies to me were red, white, and blue. Not American, not patriotic. They were literally red, white, and blue. Iron Man was red, Captain America was blue, and if you looked at New York City, Avengers Tower had a brilliant white light coming off of it. And I said, I want stories that take place in Hell's Kitchen. I want to tell stories that are like what Marty Scorsese was doing in the early 70s with Taxi Driver. I want to do stories that look like what Billy Friedkin was doing with French Connection. I want to tell stories where, because it's in Hell's Kitchen, it's mostly at night, and that the blue has faded so much that it looks like gray, and that the yellow is not a bright poppy yellow, that it's the amber of what you get off the headlights of the taxi cab. And it should rain a lot, and steam should be coming out of the street. And I said, we're in hell. Steam is coming out of the street. That's why it should look like that. And I remember when we turned in the first episode, they went, it's kind of dark. And we went, no, you read the script. I mean, how? No, they said, no, it's really dark. Like sometimes you can't see what's happening. It's so dark. And I said, that's on me. I told the cinematographer, I said, I want to use as much natural light as possible. I want it to look like The Godfather. I want it to look like if there was a light in the corner of the room and that was the only light and someone stepped in the shadow, I don't want you to call cut. I want you to just keep going. People do sit in the dark, and it should give you an anxious feeling and hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And we were really lucky that it worked. And I find it even more lucky that 5 years after I left, somebody over in the movie division woke up and said, maybe we should make some of that television. And people ask me all the time, are you really happy that Daredevil's back and Daredevil Reborn? And I go, I had nothing to do with it. It has nothing to do with me, other than, yes, they looked at what I did and made more of it. And I'm very pleased about that. But what I'm really excited about is that my friends, both in the crew, some of the writing, but that the same people that I was just talking about, which is Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio and Christian Ritter and Deb Ann Wall and Mike Coulter and John Bernthal, they all get to play those characters again 5 years after it all went away. That's incredibly exciting to me, because I want them, I knew how much fun they were having doing that and how strong they were in those roles, that the chance to do that again, how many times does that ever happen? You know, the only way that I can ever think about it is that in sports, when someone is on a team and they get hurt and they disappear, and then suddenly they come back and they're even better than they were when they were younger. That's my hope for them, is that what they're going to do is better.
I don't have any further questions, sir. So thank you so much. Congratulations for your amazing career. And again, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Acción, tu revista mensual de cine y series, con los mejores estrenos de cine, fichas y reportajes coleccionables, series de televisión y 4 pósters todos los meses. Búscala en tu kiosco.